There's a sparkle in your eyes. I feel the warmth of your skin. Just the touch of your hand makes me tremble within. Love the smell of your hair, lying here in my bed. Never gonna be alone, 'cause with you I'm finally coming home. I wanna be with you always, 'cause that is what my heart says. That's what my heart says. I wanna be with you always. You are my world in every place. It's the things that you do, and it's the smile on your face. And as time goes by, I know I'm in a better place. I'm in a better place. Without your love, I am out of place. And without you, I am just a trace. I love you with all of my heart. Together forever, never to part. I wanna be with you always, 'cause that is what my heart says. That's what my heart says. I wanna be with you always. Always, yeah. You are my world in every place. Oh, it's the things that you do, the things you do, baby. And it's the smile on your face, smile on your face. And as time goes by, I know I'm in a better place. A better place, in a better place. It's the things that you do, the things that you do. And it's the smile on your face, the smile on your face. And as time goes by, I know I'm in a better place. A better place, in a better place.
I gotta tell you something I could do. I could be running around chasing you, but I won't. 'Cause I got better things to do. Rather spend my precious time chasing somebody who loves me too. If I got $1 for every time you slam the door, I would be the richest girl alive, life. If you hadn't run away every time I asked you stay, you would sleep right next to me tonight. No, you didn't want me, all you wanted was a game to play. And you couldn't handle that I had my ways. Around your matrix and your side chicks, I'm a winner, babe. But you didn't win this, it's a part of the game. In the beginning I just didn't know that you're an enemy I held too close. Now I know, 'cause you did everything to prove me wrong. You were not the guy I thought. Now I'm beating you at your own. Yeah. If I got $1 for every time you slam the door, I would be the richest girl alive, life. No, you didn't want me, all you wanted was a game to play. And you couldn't handle that I had my ways. Around your matrix and your side chicks, I'm a winner, babe. your game. And if you were me, you would do the same. Man, I really love to play. And now that I won, then it's safe to say, no, you didn't want me, all you wanted was a game to play. And you couldn't handle that I had my ways around your mind tricks and your side chicks. I'm a winner, babe. No, you didn't win this, it's a part of the game. No, you didn't want me, all you wanted was a game to play. And you couldn't handle that I had my ways around your mind tricks and your side chicks. I'm a winner, babe. No, you didn't win
Good evening, everyone. Ellen and Bert here, and we are streaming live from Gensler, San Francisco. Bert and I are co-chairs for 2021's IIDA Northern California Pioneers in Design, and we are so pleased to welcome you to tonight's event.
For the next 30 minutes, we're going to have some really great networking. You're going to see your old friends and meet some new ones. So to start this off, scroll down and click on the Join Networking button down below. Drag your avatar to a group or to someone else if you want to chat with them. And for those of you who are having issues, click on the IT support on the right. So let's get this party started and click down and scroll down and click on Join Networking.
There's a sparkle in your eyes. I feel the warmth of your skin. Just the touch of your hand makes me tremble within. Love the smell of your hair. Lying here in my bed. Never gonna be alone. 'Cause with you, I'm finally coming home. I wanna be with you always. 'Cause that is what my heart says. That's what my heart says. I wanna be with you always. You are my world in every place. It's the things that you do, and it's the smile on your face. And as time goes by, I know I'm in a better place. I'm in a better place. Without your love, I am out of place. And without you, I am just a trace. I love you with all of my heart. Together forever, never to part. I wanna be with you always. 'Cause that is what my heart says. That's what my heart says. I wanna be with you always. Always, yeah. You are my world in every place. Oh, it's the things that you do. It's the things you do, baby. And it's the smile on your face. Smile on your face. And as time goes by, I know I'm in a better place. A better place. In a better place. It's the things that you do. The things that you do. And it's the smile on your face. The smile on your face. And as time goes by, I know I'm in a better place. I'm in a better place.
I gotta tell you something I could do. I could be running around chasing you, but I won't. 'Cause I got better things to do. Rather spend my precious time chasing somebody who loves me too. If I got $1 for every time you slam the door, I would be the richest girl alive, life. If you hadn't run away every time I asked you stay, you would sleep right next to me tonight. No, you didn't want me, all you wanted was a game to play, and you couldn't handle that I had my ways. Around your matrix and your side chicks, I'm a winner, babe. No, that you're an enemy I held too close. Now I know, 'cause you did everything to prove me wrong. You were not the guy I thought. Now I'm beating you at your own. Yeah. If I got $1 for every time you slammed the door, I would be the richest girl alive, alive. But you didn't want me, all you wanted was a game to play. And you couldn't handle that I had my ways. Around your mind tricks and your side chicks, I'm a winner, babe. But you didn't win this, it's a part of the game. Yeah, I beat you at your game. And if you were me, you would do the same. Man, I really love to play. And now that I won, then it's safe to say, no, you didn't want me, all you wanted was a game to play. And you couldn't handle that I had my ways. Around your mind tricks and your side chicks, I'm a winner, babe. No, you didn't win this, it's a part of the game. No, you didn't want me, all you wanted was a game to play. And you couldn't handle that I had my ways. Around your mind tricks and your side chicks, I'm a winner, babe. No, you didn't win this, it's a part of the game.
from the start. Together we will be stronger than all.
'cause that is what my heart says. That's what my heart says. I wanna be with you always. You are my world in every place. It's the things that you do, and it's the smile on your face. And as time goes by, I know I'm in a better place. I'm in a better place. Without your love, I am out of place. And without you, I am just a trace. I love you with all of my heart. Together forever, never to part. I wanna be with you always. 'Cause that is what my heart says. That's what my heart says. I wanna be with you always. Always, yeah. You are my world in every place. It's the things that you do. It's the things you do, baby. It's the smile on your face. Smile on your face. And as time goes by, I know I'm in a better place. A better place. I'm in a better place. It's the things that you do. The things that you do. And it's the smile on your face. The smile on your face. And as time goes by, I know I'm in a better place. A better place. I'm in a better place.
I gotta tell you something I could do. I could be running around chasing you, but I won't. 'Cause I got better things to do. Rather spend my precious time chasing somebody who loves me too. If I got $1 for every time you slam the door, I would be the richest girl alive, life. If you hadn't run away every time I asked you stay, you would sleep right next to me tonight. No, you didn't want me, all you wanted was a game to play, and you couldn't handle that I had my ways. Around your mind tricks and your side chicks, I'm a winner, babe. No, you didn't win this, it's a part of the game. In the beginning, I just didn't know that you're an enemy I held too close. Now I know, 'cause you did everything to prove me wrong. You were not the guy I thought. Now I'm beating you at your own. Yeah. If I got $1 for every time you slam the door, I would be the richest girl alive, life. No, you didn't want me, all you wanted was a game to play, and you couldn't handle that I had my ways. Around your mind tricks and your side chicks, I'm a winner, babe. No, you didn't win this, it's a part of the game. Yeah, I beat you at your game, and if you were me, you would do the same. Man, I really love to play, and now that I won, then it's safe to say, no, you didn't want me, all you wanted was a game to play, and you couldn't handle that I had my ways. Around your mind tricks and your side chicks, I'm a winner, babe. No, you didn't win this, it's a part of the game. No, you didn't want me, all you wanted was a game to play, and you couldn't handle that I had my ways. Around your mind tricks and your side
Hi, everyone, and welcome back. For those of you that participated in the pre-networking event, I hope you enjoyed it. It was a little bit of a disembodied experience, but quite fun. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. I joined. For those of you that participated in the pre-networking event, I hope you enjoyed it. It was a little bit of a disembodied experience. Sorry, I'm hearing myself, and it's fun. A little. I joined that participated in the pre-networking event. I hope you enjoyed it. It was. I'm hearing myself. How do I turn myself off? Sorry, I'm hearing myself, and it's fun. A little. Okay. Did that work? I'm hearing myself. How do I turn myself off? Sorry, I'm hearing myself, and it's fun. Okay. I think I got it. Sorry about that. I knew I was going to screw this up. Okay, well, it's good to get it out of the way first, right? And hopefully get into the action now. So that was super fun. I joined a couple of rooms. I met Indu from RMW in San Jose, which couldn't have happened, or she would have had to have driven up to the San Francisco Jazz Center to make that happen. I saw a few old friends. David Meckley's dog put him into a different room as we were in the middle of a conversation. We were talking about how you almost need a new whole set of etiquette skills to do this, to navigate this whole virtual world with our avatars, but it was quite fun. And so welcome. It's about 6 o'clock and we're starting our program now. And the first slide, is the first slide up? Great. I want to start, of course, as always, by acknowledging our chapter patrons for 2021 and our sponsors. Without our sponsors and our patrons, we absolutely could not do what we do. We could not have put on this event. We are super grateful for our sponsors, our patrons, and thank you. We are immensely grateful, and I can't express the deep gratitude that we have. And please continue to sponsor us next year. Thank you. I also want to acknowledge the committee. And I think Bert just left to go. Oh, probably not everyone's seeing Bert. I keep thinking, okay, I'm still having my disembodied experience. Oh, here he's back. Okay. The committee, another tiny but mighty committee. These guys work so hard. They probably didn't quite know what they were getting into with this virtual event. Co-chairs, Ellen and Bert, you guys were amazing. Yoko, who came in even as past president to also help out. Your efforts were incredible. CCB, working with the patrons and everyone else. And the committee wanted me to express how they're so happy that they were able to do this after almost a 2-year hiatus. We didn't have the event in 2020, as you know, and then had to postpone it in 2021. We were hoping that we could have it live, but as you know, this pandemic just won't end, it seems. But we are very hopeful, actually confident, that it will happen at the San Francisco Jazz Center in the summer, next summer. So we're looking forward to that. And thanks again, committee. And we're looking for committee members for next year. So if you have any interest in being a part, please join us. And we can get you on this committee or any number of committees. Thank you. All right, moving on. Let's see what's next. So today for Pioneers and our selection for our honoree, we decided that we would look at our theme of empowerment. That this is a theme that we've had now for 2 years in a row for obvious reasons, because we haven't had a chance to have an event last year. And so we continued the theme, and you're going to see this theme carried through everywhere, really. We started it with our diversity, equity, and inclusion events, and that theme is running through that. With our Leaders Virtual program, we asked the question, what is design excellence in a time of crisis? And to me, this is about empowering ourselves and our community to go outside of our comfort zone and go outside of our familiar design process and really do what needs to be done. And that's, to me, that's empowerment. And now I'm going to turn it over to Hélène. She's also going to talk about the care packages that the committee put together, another big project. And there was a lot of care and thought around the design, around the, I guess, in a sense, the supply chain, like who we're going to get these products from and how meaningful they are truly. And so this is another example of empowerment. And they chose women-owned, locally owned organizations or individuals, mostly small companies. And you'll hear from Hélène now about that selection process and putting the packages together. Hélène, you can take it away.
Thanks, Berta. So as Berta was saying, after us all being apart for the last 18 months, I think we have a whole new appreciation for feeling connected with our community. So knowing that this event was going to be virtual, the committee wanted to find a way to celebrate community and make us feel more connected. So we reached out to these 3 local vendors and artists and curated what we're calling an IIDA community cares package for all the guests of patrons. So the 3 artists are Melanie Abrantes, Kayoko Akabori, and Yoko Kumano, and Carissa Potter. And we're going to show you 3 videos, or a video of each of these artists, so you can get a better idea of who they are.
My name is Melanie Abrantes, and I am a woodworker and designer, and I make a line of home goods using both cork and wood. I try to just do really simple forms. I feel like my hands know what I'm doing before my mind does. It's very satisfying to watch all the chips of the wood just fall off. Underneath, you're revealing the form of the product you're making. I'm half Filipino and half Portuguese. Portugal really drew me in. And when I was there is when I saw cork being used as something else other than a cork board or a wine cork, and I saw it actually as an object. And so I studied product design. I always knew that I wanted to go back and use that material. Actual qualities of the cork. It's porous, it's antibacterial, it can be molded into a planter, and I wanted something unique and different other than just the regular terracotta pieces. It's a personal kind of love. I love the material itself, and that came afterwards, but I think I was always curious to work with it because of where it came from.
Our slogan is celebrating drinks designed in Japan. Okay, the biggest difference between a sake club and a wine club is just that it's sake instead of wine. It absolutely works like a wine club. We write tasting notes and you get to enjoy them.
Hi, my name is Carissa, and I'm the founder of People I've Loved. We're a small print workshop in Oakland, California, and we make things that I hope inspire complex conversations and connections. And basically, as silly as it sounds, make you feel a little less alone. We've been in business for 12 years now, and we have 2 Chandler and Price letter presses. We also do screen printing, and we make some objects too. We try to figure out kind of what our own problems are and what the solution might be, or how we can help each other. And yeah, that's us. Thanks so much.
And next up, we have the Distinguished Achievement Award. This award goes to the industry partner who elevates the profession of interior design through their skills, expertise, and service. This award is a symbol of appreciation for their years of experience and partnership and engagement with all of the design industry. This year's recipient goes to Scott Ray from Principal Builders. Congratulations.
So hi everybody, it's Colin Burry greeting you from London. I really wish that I could be there today with you in person, but I'm so honored to be able to introduce you to our next distinguished guest. I am introducing the one and only Scott Ray, and we are honoring him today with the IIDA Northern California Distinguished Achievement Award. And oh my, did he ever earn this recognition. You know, I've known, and many of us have known Scott for many, many years. And when he and Michael Johnson founded Principal Builders, it was really based on a very different type of general contracting organization. One that had ethics, and one that wasn't sort of padding numbers and sort of hiding things. They actually were doing what they said that they were going to do and being ethical and front and open with all of their clients. So that's just what they did for the client community. But I think what they've done for the design community goes even above and beyond that in terms of the amazing things that they've accomplished. You know, if every year they're sponsors of the Honor Awards, and many of the projects, almost every year, there's one of their projects that is being honored with an award. And the amazing thing about what Scott and the team have done is that they're not no people. Scott was always a yes person. He, no matter what crazy idea, I gave him, or Denise Terry gave him, or Kelly Dubuisar, the litany of other designers that have worked with him over the course of many, many years, he didn't say no. They always figured out a way to say yes and to build it. And what didn't matter if it was some crazy part of the design, if it was a crazy budget, the creativity always came through, and that is really, really exceptional in the general contracting community. And for that, we want to make sure that we're recognizing his achievement, his open mind, his kind heart. Not only is he an amazing professional, but he's also an amazing human who, both he and John Michael, I think, saw the bigger picture many, many years ago, and were early promoters of women in the construction industry, which is really, really exceptional. I remember sitting across from, the first female project, manager, at a contracting community, the first, superintendent at a general contracting community. They've always been advocates and, openly and engaging. So they've always been advocates of women and advancing them and promoting them within their organization and in the general construction community as well. They've really led the way, which is amazing. And that extends not only to women, but also to Latinx, making sure that there's diversity in the workforce and that they as well are reaching out to a broader network within their organization and putting people in front of all of us that sort of mirror who we are as a community as well. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you the next IIDA Northern California Distinguished Achievement Award winner, Mr. Scott Ray. Congratulations, Scott. I wish I could be there in person, but giving you a huge virtual hug. We're so proud of you. We're so delighted. Relish in this moment because you've certainly earned it.
In 2003, Principal Builders was founded with a simple mission: build cool stuff and have fun doing it. And for the last 18 years, our close-knit team, which really feels like a family, has been lucky to get to do exactly that.
We have had the opportunity to be awarded some of the coolest projects, to work alongside brilliant and creative minds, and to make dream spaces become a reality.
But we haven't just built spaces. We've made something else: lasting, truly memorable connections. Not just within our team and our clients, but with you, our peers.
From team happy hours, workout classes, picnics in the park.
Fun and joy are our core values here. See, we know that people make the place.
Fundamental belief that this community we have built together is our greatest resource to support our neighbors and the broader community that we inhabit.
Hand in hand with your help, Principal Builders has rebuilt community gardens, provided toys to families in need,
Created hygiene kits for the homeless, forwarded organizations like the Boys and Girls Club,
and helped raise awareness for Best Buddies by joining their friendship walk in Golden Gate Park.
We show we care by doing.
While the last 15 months has changed the look of our team's usual activities, we continue to take on the things we could.
We looked outward to our community, but we also had to look inward more than ever.
We met on Zoom as the rest of the world did.
Shared recipes, saw each other's living rooms, bedrooms, children, and dogs in lap.
Babies were born. We met them on Zoom.
We made cocktails together, prepared meals on video, and even took those workout classes we've always done and did them remotely.
Very importantly, we continue to support and lend a hand whenever possible.
When the time came, we still got to build some cool stuff and had fun doing it.
What we faced as a company, an industry, and a community won't soon be forgotten.
But we've learned a lot and are reassured that what was important before is still the most important.
The people who make our lives matter. If we can get through a pandemic,
we can get through anything.
You can count on that.
Thank you, IIDA. Thank you, Colin Burry. Thank you to the entire design community. I am so honored and just humbled by this recognition. It's so flattering, and I want to say I'm speechless, but those of you that know me find that that's really hard to do. I do want to start off with a funny story though. On October 2nd, right, which is a Saturday, I'm looking at my phone and I've got 3 or 4 missed calls from Lisa Bottom, somebody who I've known for almost 30 years that I haven't talked to in a couple of years. And I've got a couple of missed calls on a Saturday. And so I hit redial and Lisa picks up on a Saturday and she begins to describe, this award, this honor. And I had to stop her midstream because I had said, "Hey, Lisa, I'm getting married in about 20 minutes. Do you think we could talk about this on Monday?" And she laughed. And anyway, that was the beginning of this journey for me. So anyway, thank you again, IIDA. God, I am truly honored. An award like this, recognition of this kind, is not even possible for me as an individual. These types of accomplishments can't be done in this business without being surrounded by an unbelievable team. The fact of the matter is that 25, 30 years ago, I owe a big thanks, or actually we as a construction community owe a big thanks to the design community as a whole. 25, 30 years ago, we weren't allowed access to the pre-construction process. The things that we do in pre-construction now and the services that are provided are things that have evolved over time. And without you allowing us access early, an award like this couldn't even be possible. I think the other thing that's really important to note is that I've been surrounded by unbelievably talented people my entire life. My business partner, my friend, my confidant, John Michael, and I, when we started Principal Builders, we had this dream. You know, the dream was to be the design workshop of the general contracting industry. We had dreams of changing the industry. And so we built a system, the PBI system, right? It consisted of some behaviors, some actions, you know, just some bedside manners on how we were going to conduct ourselves on a day-to-day basis in delivering services. And then we had to go out, we had to sell that system to our employees. We had to get buy-in. And Jam and I have been blessed with just an unbelievably talented team that has bought into a system that supports our ability to get this award, and I am just honored. I'd like to also close with this. You know, there's a saying that we had at Principal Builders, and that is that you know, if you're honest, you build trust. And if you're trusted, that, you know, your employees become loyal, or your customers and your partners become loyal. And with loyalty, right, you're actually awarded forgiveness. And you know, this is a business where there is a lot of stake on these projects. People's careers are at stake. People's, you know, status within their companies are at stake, and to be able to, you know, endure over time and deliver a high level quality outcome on every single project, it's almost impossible, right? And I can't say that all my projects have been complete successes, but what I've done is I've always given it my best. And I've made enough friends along the way that, you know what, forgiveness has been offered when it's been due, and it's okay to ask for that, you know, because we're just human. So anyway, thank you, IIDA. I am delighted, I'm honored, and I'm very humbled by this award. Thank you.
All right, everyone. That was so inspiring. I just wish I could applaud and hear the rest of us all applaud together. It's one of the challenges here with this virtual experience, but that was great. And just another great example of empowering, and Scott empowering others. I love Colin. Unfortunately, it's 2 a.m. in the morning, and I know he's not here, couldn't be here with us, but that was great. And I'm going to get into the main part of the program now. I did want to take a minute to, if you guys will humor me for a minute, and I'm a little nervous about this. I do this all the time in some of my climate group meetings and events, but I don't typically do it in a business setting or with IIDA. It's a land acknowledgement. I feel like it seemed really appropriate for today. I kept thinking, should I do it? Should I not do it? But I'm like, you know what? It really does make sense. And I hope you guys will all agree. It's short. It won't take long. All right. I want to express gratitude to these original caretakers of the land that I occupy here in the East Bay of California. It is the Lijan Olani people that have been its stewards, and they on their website actually proudly state that they don't own the land. They've never owned the land. They belonged to it, and they belonged to it for thousands of years, if you can imagine, and hundreds of generations. And it only took us a few hundred to dismantle all of that. And I know this acknowledgement does not undo hundreds of continuous years of violence, genocide, and oppression. But I affirm that this acknowledgement is just one action that we can take in our ongoing efforts to honor Native people and their traditions, which is an essential part of restoring right relationship and the right resources that we rely on and the land that we occupy. This acknowledgement is in part my commitment to the process of working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. Thanks for letting me do that. And now on to Pioneers. I absolutely love this event. It's my favorite. It's always inspiring. There's always just so many diverse speakers from from all different parts of design. Last time it was an artificial intelligence speaker. This was back in 2019. And I remember listening to Mass Architecture one year, Michael Murphy, and so many great speakers. And if those that know me know that I am all about people breaking boundaries, thinking outside the box, innovating in the service of how design can have a greater impact. And now, today, I feel like that impact much more directly is linked to design as a force for good. And it's no coincidence that this is all coming together. There's so much that design can solve for. And there's so many issues that either the pandemic has exposed or not coincidentally, they've just surfaced recently. And I can't think of a more timely speaker today than Liz. And it's my pleasure to introduce her. I'm going to do a quick version. It's hard to do a quick bio introduction of her because she has so many accolades and accomplishments. But I first met Liz at NeoCon in 2019. She was the keynote speaker, and I was completely blown away. It was nothing I'd ever heard before. And I really do feel it was a start of a different trajectory for me, looking at climate change and how design can have a greater impact. And she really, truly inspired me. Now, Liz is a designer, an urbanist, and a social innovator. Her expertise lies in transforming unjust urban environments and advocating for issues of spatial and racial justice. So she leads Studio Plus A. I wish. She leads Studio O, a multidisciplinary and innovative practice right here in our own Bay Area, where she blends community-centered research, creative engagement, prototyping, and socially just planning and design built to build participatory power in communities. And to me, this is empowerment in bold letters, all caps. One of her most intriguing clients, she talked about it, I believe, at the keynote talk at NeoCon, was Pacific Gas and Electric and Hunters Point. And she did a lot of actions there with the community. Just one of her many collaborators is one of my favorite firms, Envelope A&D in Oakland. She was an innovator in residence at IIDA and a design director at the No Longer Public Architecture with their groundbreaking 1% Call to Action program that I distinctly remember back in the 2000s. And it was a great initiative. She somehow finds time to bring her social impact work into the classroom and has held academic appointments at schools like Stanford D School and UC Berkeley. And of course, she speaks often. If you haven't seen her TED Talk on gentrification, it's an absolute must. And I just listened to her talk on a podcast, great podcast, Women in Sustainability, called Design the Future, where she talks about how she loved to draw as a child. Okay, so those are the highlights. It was hard to distill. I hope I did a reasonable job. Let's join hands in welcoming Liz Ogbu.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Britta, and it's great to be with all of you. I agree that this is super disembodied experience, that I don't actually get to see you, and I'm one of those people who, when I talk, it's very much like I'm having a conversation with people in the room, whether it's like 50 or a couple hundred. So presenting on Zoom has been a kind of weird experience for me because I don't get that instant connection. So I'm going to do my best to make that work. And I'm just going to assume that you're all looking back at me and making eye contact and eagerly consuming everything that I'm talking about. I really appreciate being able to be here today and to have what I hope is going to feel more like a conversation than a lecture. And I also just want to thank Britta for offering up land acknowledgement. That is something that is very important to me too, to honor the history of the places in which we reside, because so much of what I think about my work is in helping to shape the places that enable people to live their best stories. And I feel like land contains stories and we have to acknowledge that. So I too come to you from the land of the Confederated Villages of Lisjan and their ancestors, the Chochenyo speaking Ohlone people. And in acknowledging them, I also want to acknowledge that throughout time, there have been a lot of, in particular, non-white bodied people who have been marginalized and who have not been allowed to claim these lands or to have land or spaces that have been created, celebrate them and their stories. And so that definitely inspires part of the work that I do, is how do we make sure that place celebrates everybody and celebrates their right to live the best story that they want and to thrive. So with that, I'm going to get started with the slides. You can go on to the next slide. Thank you. So as you might have heard, the title of this talk is Designing in the Apocalypse. And the not so secret thing is that this is the title of every single talk I have given since March 2020. And that's in large part because I want to be able to frame that this is what I feel like it is to design right now. And I want to mark that I am in a continual and evolving conversation to try and figure out what that means. And if you go to the next slide, in particular, I want to focus on the word apocalypse. So some of you may know that it comes from the Greek word that means an unveiling or an uncovering or a revelation. And I feel, from the time that we went into lockdown here in the Bay Area on the 17th of March, 2020, that pretty much feels like what we've been thrust into, a time where certain things that we may not have seen before are all of a sudden coming in full focus. And so if you go to the next slide, that is, the fact that millions of Black men and women, or not millions, but a lot of Black men and women are killed senselessly, that has been revealed in this time. But the crazy thing is that was always happening, right? Or, what's come to our screens is the fact that there are millions who work as essential workers, who oftentimes are low-income people of color, whose work we just started realizing was essential. Or even looking at COVID and recognizing that it's not just this appalling and unbelievable death toll that we're seeing, but if we take stock of who is really dying, at least for most of this pandemic, we saw a disproportionate amount of death in Black, Brown, Indigenous, and poor communities. Next slide. The world kind of became quiet enough starting in 2020 that there were certain stories that hit us in a really visceral way, whether we're talking about the discovery of the graves at Kamloops, the residential school in Canada, and probably other discoveries that have yet to come. This idea that, we're having these arguments about recognizing people's basic humanity and wanting to be able to protect them, or even that the climate crisis that we had always talked about is coming in the future is actually here now and wreaking endless devastation. All of these things have been coming to us in our television screens, our social media feeds, et cetera, over the last 20 months. Next slide. And so it may seem like it is in this apocalyptic vein, but the truth is that none of this stuff is new. As the Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams has said, that the virus might not know boundaries or borders, but it knows how to follow the systems of injustice that are already in place. And so if you go to the next slide, the previous pictures that I showed are really just extensions of what we already saw before the pandemic, right? The fact that there were millions living with housing and food insecurity was not new, nor was the fact that there's a higher risk for poor health outcomes and early death among communities of color, nor was there a new thing in the persistent protests that we saw from people asking that they could just be able to occupy public space safely, regardless of the color of their skin. And so while it may seem like all of a sudden we've come into this time where things feel quite cataclysmic, if you will, the reality is that they're just the business as usual. And really what has changed is that we have all, the world has gotten quiet enough and slow enough for all of us to be able to take stock of the world as it really is, as it has been designed. And so as I come to that in the frame of my work, the questions I ask is, how could that possibly be right? And how do we think about what it means to change these conditions? Because I don't think any of us would say that we are comfortable living in a world where all of those images that I just showed you are true. And so for me, the lens through which I've been thinking about that for many years is the lens of spatial justice. Next slide. And so spatial justice is a term that's actually been around for quite some time. It was coined by geographers several decades ago, but those of us in the sort of architecture and planning worlds have just started to use it much more recently. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see the definition of what it means. So justice has a geography, and the equitable distribution of access, services, and outcomes should be a basic human right. And the reality is that we live in a world where what is prevalent is the lack of spatial justice, as you can see from the next slide. We can find in countless cities across this country and even around the world situations in which, in any city, you have these geographies of harm coexisting with the geographies of benefit. And if we look at in these cities, that there are certain neighborhoods where you end up getting the industrial uses, a lot of insufficient bus routes, and a lot of vacant lots, versus other parts of the city where you end up getting the gleaming office towers or the multi-million-dollar transit centers or the nice parks. And the reality is that none of this is accidental. And if you were to overlay demographics, you would find that Indigenous, Black, Brown, and poor communities have disproportionately had less access. And so these images that you see on the screen are what a lack of spatial justice looks like. Next slide. So I know within design, we're often charged with thinking about, okay, how do we deal with the built environment? How do we shape and change this? And for me, that is not separate from this idea of racial and social justice, which I'm also passionate about. And that is precisely because of the fact that we see this correlation of who has less access, who often ends up living in the places of harm versus who often gets the ability to live in the places of benefit. And so I strongly believe that we can't actually achieve the racial and social justice unless we also achieve justice in the spaces. And that's where all of us come in, right? We are all touching the built environment. We are caretakers of the built environment. And so thinking about how we respond to this call to arms, because right now no one's looking at us to do any of this stuff. And I think if we don't take the charge to shape these environments, who will? And so a lot of my work is really framed in, if I am a caretaker of the built environment, what is my responsibility? Next slide. And in many ways, I see my responsibility as serving all of the people that you see on the screen now. So I often say that I have two definitions of clients. There's the traditional version that we all know, the person who cuts the checks and usually determines the scope and all of that stuff. And then I find that it's really important that I recognize that the other client are the people who have to live with the impact of whatever it is that I create. And the systems that we exist in often recognize the former and not the latter. And so part of my work and part of the fight that I do to think about what does it mean to exist in a place where spatial justice is possible is to recognize these clients and to build power as part of the process to be able to bring them to the table. Next slide. And in many ways, this is about shifting from a lens of looking at engagement and connecting with these people from a transactional lens. You know, how many community meetings do you have, right? It's typically how we think about it in the context of our projects. But instead, and this actually was a line I had said at some talk early in the pandemic, and somebody tweeted this at me a couple months ago and said, he looks at it every morning as his call to arms. And so it's really, if we move from this place of thinking of this as transactional to relational, how are we building relationships and actually sacred relationships? For me, that's part of what's needed to build these bridges to talk about how do we even get to a place where we can understand what justice might mean. Next slide. And so what that has meant in the scope of all of my projects is I've worked all over the world, and I've worked on projects, you know, touching a range of different types, from how to build a better cook stove to multifamily housing development, to working with kids, to build parks, to create a circus, to even in the time of the pandemic, organizing food giveaways. And so when you look at my portfolio, you might think that, oh, I wasn't quite expecting this is what an architect would do. And oftentimes I joke about the fact that I actually tend not to show a lot of buildings in my talks. And that's not because they're not there, but it's in part because I want you to focus on the things that I seek to design, the things that I seek to mold are actually experiences. And until I can center that and center the relationships on which these experiences are built, then I actually can't design anything that enables me to serve as a caretaker of the built environment and to serve as a collaborator in supporting people's ability to thrive. Next slide. But for me, as I return back to this idea of what does it mean to design in the apocalypse, the thing that I'm wrestling with right now is maybe all of that, as amazing as it is, there's a lot of the accolades that I've received, maybe it's not enough. And maybe this moment is actually calling upon us to really think about our work, and even for me to think about my work in a new and a more critical way that sort of asks, if we really want to be radical, if we want to create a future in which all of our stories are valued, what is it that we actually need to do? How do we need to change our frame of thinking? And it might even go beyond just the already innovative frame of spatial justice. And so last summer, I was asked to write a piece about cultural leadership, which wouldn't have been a problem, except it was due a week after the murder of George Floyd. And I was sort of rocked with, how the bleep can I talk about cultural leadership right now when I'm sitting with all of these feelings that are coming up for me in that time? And as I thought about it, and as I thought about, well, what does it mean to lead and what does it mean to think innovatively and about our future, I was really struck by how it felt like we had been here before, that it felt like we are caught in this loop where we're moving from these states of urgency or emergency into these states of complacency. And really the idea of urgency is almost like we've done enough, we've responded to the crisis, and then we move back to this place where it's about business as usual. You go to the next slide, please. And with urgency, I want to be really clear that it's not about the urgency of repair. I actually think oftentimes what we see when we get mobilized around a crisis, when we get mobilized around needs, is actually, how do we do enough to forget that we're uncomfortable, that these things are wrong, that maybe seeing thousands of unhoused people on our streets, maybe there's a way we can just do enough that we can be okay with that, right? And then we move into this place of complacency, which is often about not remembering that we're uncomfortable, not remembering that we think certain situations are wrong. It's basically business as usual with a better Band-Aid. And so as I sat trying to write that piece, I was really struck by how I'm tired of that. That I want my work not just to be another Band-Aid. I want my work to actually be in a place where we're breaking this loop of complacency and urgency and moving to a place where we actually are meaningfully shifting the needle on the things that we do. And I know oftentimes when I speak to rooms of designers, they're like, but we're just designers. What can we do? And it's true, but we actually have a lot of power that I think we don't often take advantage of. The fact that anytime we're in a situation, it means somebody has paid us to make decisions about a place. And so they trust our expertise. And so what I am thinking about now is, what are the questions that we can bring forth that we try to solve and address working through our expertise? And I'm not expecting that this will happen overnight, but I think it's important that we at least encounter these questions to begin with. And so I want to spend the next couple of slides just talking about what some of the questions are that are present for me now. Next. So all of this for me is really under the guise of healing. How do if this urgency complacency loop feels like the world we're living in is broken, what does it mean to think about my work in the context of healing? And so that's really the frame that the questions that I'm about to show you come under. Next slide. So the first question that I've been wrestling a lot with is, are we holding space to acknowledge that harm has been done? The strange thing about our work is that oftentimes when people commission us, the starting point is when the contract gets signed and when we're taking a stock of, what are the conditions we're reacting to? And then we move forward. And maybe there's a little bit of backwards looking to just understand, are there certain things we need to know that might impact the design? But I don't know that we often take enough time to hold that in terms of that there are often conditions of harm on the ground. Next slide. And so if we were to make space for the harm and to sort of say, maybe the first step in any project is not to move towards talking about all the new things we're going to build, but actually to sit with the conditions that exist and to listen to the stories that people have about that, we might be able to move forward in a way that actually felt meaningful to the folks who have been harmed and might actually give us the context that we need to break out of these states of urgency. And so what you see here is actually an image from the Hunters Point project that Verda mentioned. The very first act that we did after sitting in many coffee shops with lots of people who had fought for the closure of the power plant site that we were working on was to do a partnership with StoryCorps and actually create a listening booth, because we realized that there were a lot of stories that people wanted to share. And it was actually impossible for them to move forward with talking about what's next until they felt like there had been an adequate container for what had happened before. Next slide. And oftentimes, I'm sure we've all have stories of being at really terrible community meetings where we've been yelled at, but I actually think it's really important that we know that that ability for people to share the harm and to share what has happened is the first step in actually being able to build a relationship with them. And that the act of acknowledgement is this really powerful act that says, I see you. Next slide. And it's also understanding that there is compassion for what brings on this anger. This is by the poet Nayera Waheed, and she often does these like one-line poems, and this is one of my favorite. Anger is grief that has been silent for too long. And so in acknowledging the harm, I asked, what if we saw things in which people were angry or had certain things to say as actually examples of grief that we have yet to reckon with? Next slide. And that, of course, brings me to the next question. Are we reckoning with who was harmed and who benefited? Next slide. So this power plant in Hunters Point the site that I've been working on, the power plant is no longer there. The community fought for it to close in the late 90s, and PG&E tore down the site, tore down the plant in 2008 and cleaned the land. And an important part of moving forward can't just be, oh, we're ready to go and see what happened there. But we have to, in that reckoning of acknowledging harm, it also has to be a reckoning around who benefited. So one of the things to know about the Bayview is it has a lot of the industrial uses for the city of San Francisco. And so that means that San Francisco gets to look like the way it does because certain uses have been placed in the Bayview. And so what does it mean that we hold that we've kind of existed in time where there has been this unequal distribution of resources? And what does it mean as we who shape the built environment in having that conversation? Next slide. And I often speak to the benefit piece in particular because I think a lot of times when we talk about marginalized communities, we focus on the marginalizations and not the fact that there has been a whole system of oppression that has set it up, that there is a hierarchy of benefit. And so we can't just talk about those who've been harmed without talking about those who've been benefited, because it's impossible to rectify the system otherwise. Next slide. And so that previous one I showed you was actually from a protest in East Palo Alto, another city that I'm working in. And one of the things that we hold as a team in thinking about it is part of the reason why East Palo Alto exists in the way that it is certain things that were done to, as East Palo Alto wanted to incorporate, a lot of the things that would generate a tax base were taken over by cities like Menlo Park and other neighboring cities for East Palo Alto. And the freeway, when 101 was extended, just so happened they decided to extend it right in the middle of town, splitting the city in two and bifurcating resources and hobbling the city, if you will. So we can't talk about what it means to move forward with projects in that city without contending that this is the reality, right? Like certain things that happened here were done in order for the benefit of some, while East Palo Alto wound up with less. And so all of that must be part of the remit that I look at. Next. Next question is, are we grieving the presence and the cost of the trauma that we hold? And so, I think the wrestling with these difficult questions is one thing, but I think the other thing that I really am finding in a lot of my projects is that there is so much grief. And I think grief is something that all of us have come into contact with over the course of the pandemic. And so really figuring out how we hold grief in the space of projects and what does that mean is something that I'm really wrestling with now. Next slide. And so what you see here is actually a street in Charlottesville, Virginia, another city that I've been working in for the last 5 years. And this is actually the street where Heather Heyer was murdered during the racist incursion in 2017. And I show it here, and it's kind of interesting that right now there's a trial that has started actually against those who led the racist rallies. I show it now because if you were to walk 2 blocks down that street, you would actually reach Friendship Court, a multifamily affordable housing development that I've been working on for the past 5 years to try to do redevelopment on. And the thing is that it's really easy to focus on what happened in 2017 as the sort of dawn of racism in Charlottesville. But the reality is, we could go all the way back and talk about slavery. But even if we were to just go back into the 1960s, places like Friendship Court, which now exists as kind of oasis of racialized poverty, were created by urban renewal and acts that forced those who were Black and who were poor to live in certain parts of the city and cut them off from benefits. And so as we talk to the residents now about how to move forward, so much of the conversations is actually tinged with grief. And as an architect, I was never taught how to hold someone's grief, and yet it is often intimately connected to any act of being able to do something somewhere. So I asked the question of how do we incorporate that into our processes? Next slide. And then this is another project that I'm just started working on now in Ohio, where it's another example of a freeway that was built over a Black neighborhood in the 1960s. And again, as we have any conversation, again, grief is coming up consistently, and we're having to find ways within the process to accommodate it. Next slide. And then the final question for me is, are we letting what repair looks like be defined by those who have been most harmed? So going back to this idea of client and how do we give people power? Next slide. For me, it's really about how do we allow those folks to be able to dictate what we do, and that regardless of who's paying and funding and who needs to do approvals, at the end of the day, if this does not do right by those who have been harmed, then we actually are getting back into that complacency loop. Next slide. And so just going back to that Friendship Court project for a second, for me, it's normally we center the goal of what we're doing is let's deliver more units. Let's create better housing for all these people. Next slide. Without actually centering the people in the determination of what we're doing, that the goal shouldn't be better units, because as the nonprofit client in that project says, if all we do is build better housing, we're just helping the poor be poor better. So what we've been doing with that project is really looking for what else can we do that actually meaningfully shifts it, and what is determined by the residents themselves. Next slide. And so these are all the things that the residents have asked for, that they have said, beyond housing, this is what I need to be right. This is what I need to thrive. And so now that has become part of our remit as to what the development project is seeking to do. Next slide. So acknowledging, reckoning, grieving, repairing. These are the things that I'm holding on to as I think about what are the questions that we should be asking in these times, in the apocalyptic times. Next slide. And I want to leave you just with this quote that came from Arundhati Roy, who wrote a beautiful essay called The Pandemic is a Portal last summer, in which she said that nothing could be worse than a return to normal. And so my call to all of you is, as you think of your work, how do we make sure that we break free from what normal was before and think about the provocative questions, ideas, actions that we need to take to ensure that we actually could deliver on the promise of a world in which everybody has the right to thrive. Next slide. Thank you.
Liz, that was great. Of course. Oh, so inspiring. And I have so many questions that I have for you. Absolutely. I would never, ever want to go back to normal. Although I'm sensing that it's the push, absolute push and pull, and a lot of people are pulling towards normal, and I don't know. I mean, they'll be able to sustain it briefly, but not for long, right? And sadly, it'll mean that we're not learning and growing from that experience.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, I was just gonna say, I think the, normal is what we've all known for so much of our lives. And even if we think of our training, right? Like that we were inculcated and all of that. And so to break free from that, in a moment where we don't have the brackets of the pandemic, which made everything feel weird, so it was okay not to be normal. I think it actually requires a commitment on our part. And so I think it's about being intentional to resist the pull, and even taking time now in this space before normal is prevalent again, to sort of ask, what is it that you want to keep of this time? What are the things that you have seen that you want to make sure you don't forget? And how are you going to hold yourself accountable to that?
Yeah, and I think if we're going to embrace resistance and adaptation, that those of us that do resist the pull will have we'll have a little bit of a head start, right?
Yes.
Okay, I'm waiting for questions. You guys, I hope you're as inspired as I was. I'm just so happy to be on screen with another human being, not by myself. But please put your questions in the chat. I'm sure there must be a lot. I have a few questions. I don't know, Liz, I sent a few of them out. Yeah, so yeah. Hopefully they were okay. I'm going to go ahead and start with my first one. I loved your title. It was super intriguing. So I had to, and I love words and I love roots of words. And so I had to do what you did and go to the root of apocalypse. And I saw the Greek, revelation and unveiling. And I also saw that in the early Renaissance, it was also similarly this idea of insight and vision, which is so interesting and different from what it's become in our modern era, where it's shifted to this idea of cataclysm and destruction, and truly ultimate destruction, right? The ultimate, right? Like, the
one you don't come back from. Yeah.
The Walking Dead on the street, right? And so my thought is that maybe we've lost our ability to trust in this modern era, our ability to trust in ourselves deeply, or have the understanding that you have to be willing to destroy or to take something apart in order to rebuild or reveal something new, or rebirth in a way, right? And so what's your take on that?
I think that's correct. I mean, so there was a talk that I heard from Sonia Renee Taylor many, many months ago. She wrote The Body Is Not Apology. And she described, we have an obsession with comfort, right? And so reacting against some of these things, trying to exist in this place where you're letting the revelations happen, you're accepting that some things, perhaps it's their time to end, and you're watching the destruction of that. You may even be participating in the destruction of that. That's super uncomfortable, right? And so we're really hungry. We become hardwired to seek to comfort, to run to comfort. And so I think we shy away from some of these things because we're just not used to existing in this steady state where things are unknown. We've been taught that that is uncomfortable and to actually seek out stability. And so I think in some ways, this is like working against our operating instructions. I've been joking throughout the pandemic that The Matrix, which I remember being made to watch for some architectural theory course, is really a documentary. But it's a helpful analogy in this case, right? Like there is, like when you're within the matrix, there's a way in which the world operates, and you kind of just are taught to accept that and not question it. And then when you come out of the matrix, it's I was about to curse, but it's a whole mind-bending action.
Yeah.
Because you're like, wait, what does it mean that this thing wasn't real? That these things that I set up and I understood, that they're not what I thought it to be, right? And we see Neo freaking out in the beginning because he can't handle that disjuncture of the world that he knew for so long. And so in some ways, I think that's kind of the place where we're caught, right? Like it's almost overwhelming to hold that it could be different and that we might want it to be different, and that we're going to have to sit in this place in order to get to the place where it is different and go away from everything that we've known.
Yeah. Okay. We have a question from the audience, and I think it's great because it's a question about grief, and I do feel like that word is going to come up more and more as I'm really big on climate change and looking at all of those issues, and I think we're losing so much biodiversity. Animals are becoming extinct by the minute. And I have my Bibles here. One of them is This Is Not a Drill, the Extinction Rebellion Bible, and there's a couple of it's a group of essays, and one of them is Climate Sorrows. That's the title. And the other one is Doom and Bloom, right? And you almost have to accept or embrace that grief in order to move on or move forward, right? But to learn how to deal with that grief is something that I find is very challenging for myself and probably for the rest of us modern people here. Okay, the question is from the audience. Thank you for the question. Is, can you share how you initiate the conversation about acknowledging grief and holding space as part of your practice to potential new clients?
So, I will say trying to tell a client that we need to hold space for grief usually induces some form of freak out, because they're like, what are you talking about? And I often couch it not specifically in terms of grief, but more that we need to hold space to be able to listen and to talk to people. So, I remember in the East Palo Alto project, this client had actually taken over from successive slumlords and had brought me and a couple of other people on to try and see, well, what can we do to improve the quality in this rather ridiculously large housing development? And we proposed doing these listening sessions. And I should say that I'm kind of notorious amongst my clients because I usually refuse to hold community meetings, at least not in the beginning of a project, because I find them to be incredibly transactional. And they're not places where you're going to hear any sort of grief, right? Like, well, you will in the form of being yelled at, but it's not a place where you could actually hold that grief. And so, I said to the client, we need to do these listening sessions because we have to be able to talk to people. We have to start to build some relationship in which they trust us. And once they trust us, then we'll be able to actually hear what's going on so that I can do my job and help you understand how to improve the quality of this place. But if people don't trust us, they're not going to tell us what they need or what they desire. And then whatever we put out, there's a huge chance that it could blow back on us because it's not the right thing, right? Like I can look at all the statistics and say, I think the community needs this, but I don't actually know if people need that until I talk to them. So I often couch it in terms of, can we just talk, right? Like, can we just start to hear and build these relationships? So that usually for clients gets them started. And then once, I'm in this setting of small groups or individual interviews and I'm getting these stories back, I kind of mediate that back to the client and I share those stories and I sort of couch it in the, you may not have caused the harm, but right now you're the person in position of power, so you've inherited it. So instead of us getting like lost in the fact that like the blame game of who caused what, can we just acknowledge that it exists and that folks will not engage in what you're trying to create unless we figure out a way to move through this and actually address it. And then the other thing I would say that I do is when it comes time to addressing it, often do it in like bite-sized pieces, right? Like I'm not trying to solve grief in a single blow because that is just impossible. But it's like, are there some simple things that I can do to respond to it? So I mentioned that StoryCorps booth in the Hunters Point project. That really emerged from like these early one-on-one interviews that we did with folks where they told us about stories being lost in the neighborhood because people were dying or being displaced. And so we thought, well, one way that we can respond to that and show that we heard them was to partner with StoryCorps, get all those stories archived in the Library of Congress. And because we're designers, we can build a listening booth for that to occur. And so when people came and we played the stories back in a listening party after we got several stories recorded, people were like, you heard us. We didn't ask for this, but this is exactly what we wanted, right? And so then that built our trust a little bit further. And in that booth, I mean, I interviewed some people. One of our most indispensable pieces was a box of Kleenex because there was so much crying as people were telling these stories and literally grieving while recording those stories. So I want to also frame that, like, to respond to grief isn't necessarily about this like giant move. I mean, building a listening booth out of shipping container is a little bit of a giant move, but like responding in some way that shows that you've heard and that you're here for this journey is actually like the most important thing to do. And there's a lot of different ways that that can look.
Wow, so just being there, just having that box of Kleenex is the beginning.
Yeah, and not, you know, I sometimes tell a story on that project where there was somebody who I interviewed in that booth who I had talked to her husband to get her to come into the booth, or to get both of them to come into the booth. But I think her husband hadn't quite relayed what the project was. So when we got into the booth, she was like, I'm not talking about anything but the power plant. I'm not talking about my personal life or my family or anything like that. And by the end, because I treat a lot of these conversations like I'm making a friend, right? Like I'm not an architect working with you as a client. I'm making a friend because we have to somehow work together. She was telling me about her like grandbabies who were just being born. And I saw her, you know, maybe a year or two later, and I always used to see her around on our events. But a year or two later, I was at an event out in the community, and she came up to me and she just looked down. And I would say, you know, I think another thing that is really important about the grief piece is like, you know, if you think about with your friends or your family members, you can tell when they're down. You can tell when they have something on their heart. And so to do the same thing for someone you encounter in these processes. So I did that for her that day. I said, what's wrong? And it happened to be the anniversary of the murder of her son. And she was just sitting with that. And I honestly actually had to go to a couple other places, but I was like, nope, for this moment, I wouldn't abandon a friend if they like had this on them, and I can't abandon her. And so I just sat and let her just talk and share stories of her son with me. And that's something, you know, from that very first moment in the booth, I couldn't have imagined she would have done, but it was a testament to the fact that we had built a relationship, not just a sort of transactional architect to client. And so I think that's another thing to think about, really easy step in some ways of how grief can be held.
Yeah, it's something that we probably don't do well at all. We haven't been trained to do, just listen, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, more questions would be great, but I have a few more and I'm happy to have a conversation, just me and Liz. All right, my second question is, I was given this book. I have a couple of Bibles. I love this book, All We Can Save. And I go back to it. There's poems, there's essays, all by women. When I first got it, it was given to me by someone in the industry. And I was like, oh, this eco-feminist book, I don't know, because I've struggled, I admit, you know, with this idea of Mother Earth and this feminine side, nature and nurturing and giving. But as I read, I was more and more compelled by the discussion that women might be the key to finding an equitable path forward. For one, patriarchal systems, part of the systems of oppression that include extraction, control, competition, subjugation, have been a part of the problem, or a big part of the problem. What do you believe is the role of the feminine in this process of repair and healing?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. And I think that the feminine is, you noticed in the talk that I spoke about this idea of being a caretaker of the built environment. And I think care is so important. And so I think we associate the feminine and the maternal with this idea of care, of birthing and watching over. And I think that is critical. I think so much of the like kind of almost within the systems of oppression, like things are very transactional. Things are very much about the hierarchy. Things are very much about power and control, as you have noted. And so I think what has been lost, and what was even, I hope conveyed through my storytelling around grief, is like you can't get to the place where you could hold that if you aren't in a place where you understand care and understand the idea of you as a giver of care, as you as someone who tends to something. And so if that's about the feminine, then so be it. I think, I was in Peru right before the pandemic, and they talk about like Pachamama, which is Mother Earth, and like the earth is always tending to us, right? And so I think there's also an energy that's about like, what is the reciprocity? If someone is tending to me, how do I show care and tending back to them? So I want to hold that I think both of those things are true, not just the idea of the kind of feminine or maternal in terms of the giver of care, but also this idea of receiving care, that you're in relationship around that, which maybe that's a feminine thing, but it might just be a human thing that we need to get to, of what it means to participate in that system and in that relationship. If you think mother to child, right? What does that look like?
And somebody did just explain it to me that we all, men and women, have aspects of masculine and feminine within us. And we've been taught to repress the feminine, all of us. So
yeah. Well, we're taught like emotion is inconvenient, right? That it gets in the way of the things that we want to do. Or I will often rail around how we talk about expertise and being objective. Nobody's objective. It's impossible. We're human beings. We have emotions. We have stories, right? But because we're taught to ignore this, I also think that's what makes it possible to go into that state of complacency that I mentioned in the talk, right? Like, you can be complacent if you ignore certain things, right? If you don't take in how badly seeing people being hungry or seeing people dying needlessly, if you don't sit with how that feels, you can continue plowing ahead in life. And so embracing that side of us and sort of saying that that is legitimate, I think is really important.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. And this is actually a great question from the audience. Yay. Thank you. Indu, actually, I met you in the little virtual breakout rooms. It's too bad, Liz, that you didn't get to experience this. The avatars, our heads were in these little bubbles. And I met Indu from RMW in San Jose. The two of us were in a room, just the two of us, for a little while until a few other people joined. And she is asking this question: design practice and design education tends to define design success as manipulating people's sensory experiences with whatever experience you want them to have in a space. Holding space is radically at odds with this tendency. How can designers lose their desire for control and specificity to enable holding space? So control is all about the masculine, right? So
yeah, it's a great question. And, I honestly think that the answer to that might just be like a really intentional deprogramming of yourself, right? Like, I've given a couple talks to schools this past year, and I said, look, I went to Harvard, but I think this would be typical of whatever school I had gone to. I was trained to be a white supremacist, right? Like, that is the foundation of architecture. And so, you see me, you see my skin color, you see I'm a woman, like that's not necessarily a thing you would think that would normally come out of me. And so without actually intentionally stopping myself to see when I was doing certain behavior that replicated that, I can't actually shift to something that is free from those frames of oppression, right? And so some of it is just like, they talk about like this idea of acknowledging first, right? So seeing when it happens. So seeing when I'm in the space of a meeting and I'm trying to control the narratives of what happens, like being accountable to myself, to catching that. And then I think if you're in a firm or in a practice, it might be a conversation of how are you all holding yourselves accountable to that, right? what are you going to set up as your operating instructions, knowing that like the way the system is set up, from the way that we talk about how projects normally proceed forward to what the goals are in a project, how are you all collectively holding yourselves accountable to not falling into certain pitfalls? Some of it for me is giving community members agency in the process and asking them, giving them actual power to hold me accountable, right? So that when I start doing things that feel like they're shaping their experiences or determining what they should have, that they're calling me out on it. And then, beyond that, I've been spending time just trying to train up through other disciplines that do talk about how to work more organically with people to understand what are skill sets and what are ways of thinking that I need to have to break from that addiction to control.
It's interesting. That made me think of almost like a meditation practice or being in the moment practice, where you some of the prompts are just observe, don't criticize, don't judge, just observe your actions, observe the actions of others, describe, right? And it's work, right?
Yeah, it takes a long time to do, and that noticing is super important, because you can't actually stop yourself until you first notice the action. And so I would say, like, if you want, what's your first step to do? I think it's that. And then, another exercise that I will sometimes do in projects is just understand, like almost do a power analysis, right? To sort of figure out, well, who has less power but is more impacted by a situation. And then in giving them more power, part of what I entrust with them explicitly is the ability to hold myself in the process accountable to make sure that we don't fall into those pitfalls.
Yeah, great. Okay, I have another question from the audience, from Hannah. Like you mentioned before, we have a habit of following the rules of the world or avoiding anything that would cause discomfort. There are a number of people who like to turn a blind eye to issues, hate, global warming, etc. Do you have advice on reaching out to those people, and in general and in through design?
I'm glad these are all easy questions.
I'm glad you think they're easy.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, part of this goes back to this idea of that relational piece. I think that everybody, I try to operate with the belief that everybody is doing the best that they can and is operating from a place that is very rational to them. And so part of when there is someone who I am trying to convince, I try to understand what their perspective is, where are they coming from, and trying to figure out if there is something that I can do where I can translate what I'm trying to say in a way that speaks to what they need to hear. So like with some clients, sometimes some of the things that I propose might be like, well, that is batshit crazy. There's no way that we would do that, right? But it might be like what they understand and need is something that just sounds different, but it's the same thing that I'm talking about. So with PG&E, in the beginning, to do all the event activation that we did on that site, PG&E doesn't do that. They're an energy company, and they're like looking at us like we're crazy and talking about community organizing, community development. And so what we realized is that to the team that we worked with, how they got judged on was how well the site was maintained, right? So site management was what their superiors looked at to see whether or not they were doing their job correctly. And so taking a risk was really hard because it could potentially jeopardize their position in the company. And so what we started doing is referring to what we were doing as site management. We sort of said, by actually activating the site, we're kind of getting a regular stewardship. So we're keeping the site from being vandalized by folks in a way that it would be if it was just empty. We're actually building up reputation because the site was becoming known as a hub for community benefit and joy, not a sort of desolate 30 acres that hadn't seen any development in 10, 15, and now 20 years, right? And so once we started talking about site management, it made it so much easier to move it up the chain of people being like, oh, okay, I got what you're saying, right? So it's, if I had just gone in sort of saying, why are they so stubborn? Why aren't they listening to me? I would have never gotten to that place where I'd have seen, oh, it's just a matter of translation. They can't understand it if I refer to it as this, but they could understand it if I refer to it as that. And so it actually requires me taking the time to understand what's important to them and what they need. And, you know, I would say oftentimes I like get a reputation amongst clients and also amongst friends that like, almost like I'm the person to confide in, like I'm the person who will listen. And that's not to say, you know, there are definitely people who like do not in this world who do not believe in my right to exist, right? And so I'm not trying to convince those. Like, I'm kind of like, yeah, you guys got what you need. I understand that some of that is also built on their life experience and what the world has told them to expect. And so I have some compassion in that vein that allows me to exist with them, but does not mean that I have to deal with them. So I think some of it is also understanding and accepting that there might be some who it is not your job to convince, right? That they will need to come there on their own, but maybe having compassion for how they got there in that way and understanding that whatever they're thinking is coming out of a rational place, even if it seems irrational to us.
That's great. Okay, still not another question yet from the audience. So I have one last question. We are getting close to the hour here. And I wrote these questions before the talk and I wasn't quite sure if they would fit, but this one is actually great because I saw this slide. You had a slide that said urgency/emergency and then versus complacency. And in your description of the talk, you talk about complicity. And so my question is that I have been thinking about this a lot. I recently heard a talk that mentioned that if as designers we do nothing, we're complicit. Design is complicit. And a friend said, well, it's complacency too. And so I'm trying to like distinguish between the two. Are we complicit or are we complacent? Are we complicit in our complacency? How do you see it?
I think it's possible to be both. So, you know, I feel one of the things I said in the talk was that we're all kind of wrestling with this, the awareness of a world that is functioning exactly as designed, right? So perhaps you may have not really paid that much attention to the fact that so many people lived with food and housing insecurity before this pandemic, or that there were most of the people who would be essential workers are actually low-income people of color, or that, you know, for somebody who looks like me, I don't get to have the same experience of walking in a lot of public spaces as someone who looks like you, right? Like maybe that wasn't necessarily on your radar before, but it is now. And so whereas before your action could have been deemed as complacency, now, if you choose to do nothing, having this knowledge, you are complicit. And I think that there is an unintentional complicity that happens within design in that we get these remits to design spaces in certain ways, irregardless of the consequences, or we're just not taught to, or I shouldn't say taught, well, we're not taught, but I also don't think clients have the expectation that we hold those things as part of our considerations, right? And so in that case, we actually become complicit in any harm that results from the work that we do. And so I often talk about how can we shift from being complicit in harm to being complicit in healing. So when I talk about thinking about this other client, right, the people who are impacted by the stuff that I create, holding their values, holding what is important to them as central to the tenets that drive the work is part of me trying to be complicit in healing. That if I can understand what they need and what they desire, and after I am done with a project, leaving them in a better position than when the project started, then I might be able to say that that my work wasn't contributing to their continual harm, that it actually was starting to contribute to their possibilities of healing.
I love that. I love complicit, turning the tables, complicit in healing versus complicit in harm. Okay, one last question. I do want to ask this because it's from CCB, and she's worked so hard on this program and the golf program and the Leaders Virtual program. They all kind of came at the same time. So she's probably very happy that this program is coming to a close. Thank you, CCB, and good to not see you. You can see me. Okay. Her question is creating places for people to live their best stories. Wow. Do you get to bring that goal to every project you work on?
I'm lucky enough to be able to say yes. I mean, part of it is picky. I'm picky. I won't take a project unless I can hold that as a goal. So, I definitely screen my clients to make sure that this is something that they can be committed to. And then, the power of being able to celebrate stories and to nurture story is that because we're all human beings, we all actually respond to stories. I know sometimes people think there's no way I could get a client to do any of the stuff that Liz is talking about. But the reality is that the folks that we normally put in the client camp are people too, and they have their own stories. And so part of the stories that I try to celebrate and lift up aren't just for the folks living in low-income housing. It's also for the folks who are managing low-income housing or the folks who own the low-income housing. It's like they all have stories. And what I'm trying to do is create a place where those whose stories haven't been celebrated get a chance for it to be celebrated. And those who may have stories of privilege understand that they're able to participate in that act, right? That can be part of their story too. And so I think there's something really powerful with leading with stories because it is a thing that binds us and that allows us to see people as human beings, not roles or characters in a sort of larger play that we have no control over. And that if we can shift things in that direction and get to things that are about heart and not just brain, I actually think that's the key to shifting and breaking this loop of urgency and complacency is if we can get to a place where we see each other as human beings and we treat it as part of our work to nurture not only ourselves, but the other people that we share this planet with.
Yeah, we come back to the feminine again, I think, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
You'll never hear a disagreement from me on that term.
the heart or that part of us versus the brain or the rational side, the more emotional side. And I think we do need to tap into that. And I think it's just wonderful that you get to have these incredible clients. And I do think too, storytelling is a way to gain access, to get a connection. It's so powerful. Absolutely. Do you have any final words or thoughts for the group? Otherwise, we'll close this out. Thank you, everyone.
I mean, I will just say thank you for inviting me. And I always, I'm excited that folks are open to having this kind of conversation because I also recognize it's not supposed to be about lone army of Liz or a couple of us who do this kind of work, right? I feel like that goes back into participating in this system where we just lift up a few folks who can do the thing and they're all special and heroes, and then everybody else goes about and does, business as usual. The world will not change if that is the case. So I think if you leave with anything, maybe it's an invitation to, lead with your heart more, to find the stories in your projects, and also to know that that is part of your story too. And so as you are supporting other people with their stories, you're supporting your story to thrive as well. And so just look for the little moments that you can do it. You don't have to do it all at once. Start small and, think about those questions of acknowledging, reckoning, grieving, and repairing, and go forth.
All right. Thank you so much, Liz. I just completely inspired again by your talk. I hope someday we get to meet in person and maybe have a cup of coffee. I would love that. And again, I just want to congratulate Scott and thank Colin for the introduction to Scott. Thank the committee, Bert and Ellen, and everyone that worked hard to put this all together. We and Goliath, who put the program together, this virtual program. Who else? yeah, I guess that's about it. And everyone that attended, I hope you got a lot out of it. And I would love to, and Liz, I'm sure we would love to hear more on what you thought and what your takeaways were. So thank you again. And everyone, enjoy your evening. Good night. Bye, Liz. Thank you.
Thank
This was
you.
a blast. I loved it.
That is what my heart says. That's what my heart says. I wanna be with you always. You